Thank you. Awesome. Welcome to the digital media panel. I'm so glad to be hosting you tonight. My name is Belinda Uwase. I will also be moderating this talk. Just some quick Zoom housekeeping. This is a live translated Zoom. So there's LSQ interpreters and ASL interpreters who will be spotlighted, and you may also pin them if need be. They're spotlighted right now. So we have Tessa, Isaac. We also have our live translation from Danielle. And yeah, so if you need the ASL or LSQ, please pin those so you have easy access. And before we begin, I would just like to do a land acknowledgement. Thank you again all for joining us. We also have closed captioning available. So if you need that, please see the CC icon in your Zoom toolbar for subtitle settings. So before we begin our presentation for this digital media panel talk and open up conversations about art in the public realm and how we implement community arts in spaces that are changing in various ways, Steps Public Art wishes to acknowledge the sacred land on which we are meeting tonight. It has been a site for human activity for 15,000 years. The territories include the Huron, Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. The territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, taking only what is needed and ensuring the dish is never left empty for others. Today, the meeting place of Te Toronto is the home to a large, active, and diverse urban Indigenous community from many nations across Turtle Island. And we are grateful to use this land to share ideas and generate creativity. As a public arts organization, we recognize our privilege in working on stolen and unceded lands, and we are working to unlearn colonial structures to move towards reconciliation. In the chat, you will see what we have shared, a link to nativeland.ca. This is a great starting point to help learn about the traditional Indigenous territories we currently reside in, as well as treaties, communities, and languages. We encourage everyone to learn about the lands we call home and about the Indigenous communities we share this land with today. We are very grateful to all those that came before us. I'm just going to go quickly over some housekeeping again for those who are joining. Thank you and welcome to the digital media panel. This has live interpretation. So if you need closed captioning, please see the CC icon for subtitles. And then you can also click the globe if you need live simultaneous translation, which will be offered by Danielle. We also have ASL and LSQ interpretation. The interpreters are spotlighted. So please be sure to pin those if you need that for easy access. Thank you again. So before we begin, I'm just going to introduce myself as I will be moderating this talk. And then I'm going to hand it off to our three amazing panelists to introduce themselves as well. And then we will get right into it. So thank you. My name is Belinda Uwase. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the arts programs coordinator for Steps Public Art. And it's an honor to be moderating this talk today for the digital media panel, which is in collaboration with Shaping Space as well. And yeah, thank you so much for all having us. I will pass this off to Nuff, who will then pass it off to either Miriam or Katie, who are our three panelists for today, to introduce themselves. Thank you so much.
Okay, should be unmuted now. Hi, everyone. I'm Nuff. I'm one of the panelists today. I am a current graphic designer and also new media artist. Basically, I make fun stuff on computers all day long and was part of the Steps CreateSpace Residency last year, 2021. I think it was last year. Yeah, that's enough for me. I will pass it on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kathleen Buckley, but you can call me Katie. I'm an arts administrator based in St. John, New Brunswick.
Au niveau des arts à Saint-Jean.
An art historian by education, but professionally I work with contemporary art with a focus on artist-run initiatives. I am the former executive director of Third Space, which is the organization that runs the Art at Night Festival Third Shift. I'm currently self-employed as a freelance grant writer for artists and nonprofits. And I'm also a founding member of the Atlantic Art at Night Festivals Alliance. Thank you. I'll pass it to Miriam.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for being here and for having me tonight. It's really nice to be on a panel with you, Nuff and Katie. My name is Miriam. I am an art curator and I'm based in Toronto. I work as an art curator and also as a community organizer, and I focus my projects working with artists who work in the mediums of digital art, new media, and especially XR, virtual reality and augmented reality. I've been pursuing these kinds of questions around what our evolving relationships are within technological and digital developments that are quickly evolving all of the time. I run a project space called Skyfine Foods, and I also work with the XR platform Styly Global, which is a platform and online digital studio that artists and creatives can use to make their own virtual and augmented reality projects. Alongside those, I'm often involved in a variety of other projects, and I love to, connect with others and facilitate events that bring people together, and also find ways to push forward the mediums, these new mediums of digital and XR. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Again, welcome if you're just tuning in to the Digital Media Panel Talk of 2022. It's my honor to be hosting this tonight and also moderating. If you're not familiar, I'll just give a quick little spiel. So STEP's CreateSpace, in collaboration with Shaping Space, is presenting this talk on the technological advancements such as AR and VR and digital art in the art sector. And I'm joined today by panelists Miriam, Nuff, and Katie, who just introduced themselves, just for some general context. And yeah, thank you all for joining us tonight. I will now go into the questions. As an introductory question, and to also give us some context on how you see this art form, my first question would be, how would you define digital art? And if you could speak on your experience with this art form specifically.
I can start.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Thanks. The digital art that I've worked with is mostly in the form of projection, streaming, video, animation, and the platform Twine. All of these in the capacity as the exhibitor or facilitator, not the creator. Through my time at Third Space, I was able to encounter many different digital media and approaches to digital media, both used as permanent installations in the digital sphere, considered probably public art, and as well as temporary public art in the physical world through the Art at Night festival that I ran. Our organization did not have the capacity to present augmented reality and virtual reality projects. That is quite rare here in Atlantic Canada, although the Center for Art Tapes in Halifax has a great library of tools, and some artists are doing great work there. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, Miriam, about that.
You can go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's a really important question. And I think that what is digital art is being defined all the time right now. From my perspective, digital art is art that's created using different forms of digital tools. And by that, I mean tools that are generally contained within a device, a tech device, like a computer or an iPad or a tablet or a mobile device. So artists that use these kinds of tools contained within these devices to produce all kinds of art. Now, this can extend. Sometimes the tools used for creation evolve into the digital when it comes to presentation format. So this kind of genre of digital art can be really expansive and also include lots of different mediums and processes that are used and then result in a digital format presentation. But again, this kind of comes back to the use of different technological devices, either to create and build or to present the final format of the work. Then in terms of my experiences, there's been quite a range. And for about a decade now, I've been really interested in working with digital art. I love the medium. I find it so exciting. And my experiences have ranged as well in terms of exhibitions, especially that have been in virtual spaces. So 3D digital interactive spaces that can be found online or within an app on a VR headset. And then I've also worked on projects that result in presentations that are based on screens using projectors and TVs, or sometimes virtual reality headsets, sometimes mobile devices to look at augmented reality. And the projects are generally exhibitions that involve small groups of artists who are working within this medium and finding ways to bring this into a public space and connect with communities while showing their work.
Should I go?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to venture a definition, because we're going to end up in what is art territory, and that's never a good place to be. But I think, yeah, just the idea, as Miriam was saying, of either creation or presentation of the artwork itself, involving some kind of, like, digital being basically anything that communicates in like electrical 0 and 1 signals. So I think about audio that's recorded through some sort of like digital recording device, as that can be digital art. It doesn't have to be something that has the look of being made by, artificially. Maybe something that's 3D printed, that, a file has been sent to a machine that has then spit out a physical object. And even though the end result exists in the physical, I would consider that digital art to some extent. In my case, my first job was, well, actually not true, my second job was working at a video game studio. And so very early on, I was kind of immersed in digital media. I've since, on the commercial side as well, built a lot of stuff in this universe that with the intention of, selling things for commercial reasons. And my artistic practice actually comes out of sort of being a little bit burnt out doing that stuff commercially. And so in my work, I try to break a lot of these tools or use them for nonsensical reasons.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm very curious to see like how it differs. And I think that's why that question was so great. I think it's such an expansive art form. And as you all mentioned, like it varies especially from an organizational standpoint, how I engage with this very differently than a practitioner, which kind of goes into our next questions and seeing what challenges come with the presentation of digital art in your individual experiences.
Well, maybe I'll start with this one. So there's definitely lots of challenges. So from my perspective, I'm usually thinking about ways to present, more finalized projects, whether it's an exhibition or an event, or like I said, finding ways to connect with community around more like finished work. So problems that I've encountered, or challenges and difficulties, are usually to do with devices and the means to present said work. So this is a range of challenges that I've experienced, whether it's, devices that maybe are not coded for the specific works. By that, I mean, like, if you have a file that's not prepared properly for a specific device, so maybe a TV or a projector, so you're always kind of adapting files and making sure that you have all the equipment that's required. This goes hand in hand, of course, with like the budget for projects, or does a given space have access to the devices and tech gear that's required in order to present this? Maybe do you guys want to jump in, and then we can think of more challenges, because I think there's a lot, but there's also the flip side, which I think we'll talk more about soon.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Go
No. Okay. Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I've encountered.
Un des défis que j'ai rencontrés, c'est Katie, lorsque je pense ne pas avoir eu accès à de l'équipement spécialisé dans la région où je suis. Ben, écoutez,
with different capacities, different resources, and that's a question I have for you, Nuff, as a practitioner. How do you adapt your work to fit different just different spaces that have access to different things that that you might need? Or do you own your own equipment? Do you have to, if you work in a specialized medium?
Yeah, this actually reminded me of something that happened in, I think, 2018, maybe 2019. A group of us, I'm in a kind of new media collective, and we had worked on a piece that we were going to present at the Ontario Science Centre. They used to have, maybe still do, an event that happens over like Family Day weekend, where it's just a showcase of things called the Tech Art Fair. It's just a showcase of like different art projects that incorporate interesting things. And we had rented, I think, 4 or 5 iPads to show. This was a piece that had to do with AI bias. So the idea was that it would take a picture of the viewer, and then it would kind of rate them based on a database of faces that we had trained the AI on. And none of the iPads that we had rented could run this installation. The OS was too old, wasn't up to date. So we ended up having to take our own laptops in. And like I said, this was Family Day long weekend, 50,000 odd families came through with children with germs touching your own personal equipment. We had to then wipe them down. This is pre-pandemic times, but it's actually, I'm very grateful that this happened, because I was the only person that had rubbing alcohol in the country, just because we stocked up for this event. But yeah, that's an example of just format issues, file version issues, and what we tend to deal with. Typically, you might be able to run whatever thing you've made on your own machine, and no other machines will run it the same way. So you've got to just constantly test and troubleshoot.
Oh, that's like, it's funny now, but it must have been so stressful at the time, and really intense to bring your personal device into a public setting.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's tough. I feel like this leans really well into a question about like the challenges brought by, I guess, tech equipment evolution. We kind of touched on like issues between conservation and tech always evolving and how certain things don't always work together. And like how, yeah, I guess how you work around those challenges and how that affects your work and your projects. Or even like elaborating, I guess, on some of what you already spoke on, Nuff, on those challenges with the tech equipment in digital art.
Yeah, so I can jump in with a few things. One of the big ones for me, I'm a Mac user, and one of the big ones for me is just like the Mac PC thing, especially if you're working with any kind of 3D software. Chances are, like, Mac users are in the minority in the 3D space. So chances are, like, you send someone a file, they send it back to you, you can't open it anymore, or you know, you open something, now they can't open it. And so that's one of the big ones for me. And then just generally, like, generations. So every time a new update comes along for a software, something breaks. And it's just one of those things you have to get used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely requires a lot of agility and willingness to like learn new softwares and new programs and new platforms and be aware of what devices are out there. And I must say that the expertise that I find digital artists have within their own medium is so incredible and so valuable. And that, I mean, this must be challenging as well for the individual artist to then be maybe expected or loaded with this expectation that they will know the answers about, you know, how best to use a device or present a work. But I think this exchange for me has been super important, and just, you know, trusting that those who are working in the media might have the answers, and then when not, yeah, just finding a way. And I mean, this is sometimes what I like, you know, it can mean that a lot of people have to be involved, and you can reach out and, you know, find a way to solve potential problems between whether it's a platform or a device issue.
Yeah. Sorry, I think Katie seemed like you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the pressure that's put on artists to answer those questions, like you said, Miriam. And that reminds me of working with Third Space, where I was the only employee there for most of the year. And the organization acted as a vessel for artwork to be created and presented. But when your strength is not in the presentation of a specific medium, you do have to lean on the artist to solve the problems. And so I think that was something that was quite frustrating in that capacity, especially during COVID, where we would have artists sending us files to be presented in person. And we thought this was great because the artist with digital work didn't have to be present, and there were no shipping costs, which was great. But then the onus was on us as event organizers to facilitate the presentation of the work. And so I gained a lot of admiration, even more admiration for artists working in digital media to keep up with these developments and learning new softwares, learning about new devices, and always troubleshooting, because that would be frustrating.
Yes, yes. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the admiration, like, it goes back in the other direction too, because the number of times we have to email people just like, do you have a blah, blah, blah? And I'm sure they get the email and they like have to Google what we're asking for, and then like, yeah, well, we can have one by the end of the week. And so
les organisateurs également. Alors donc, c'est toujours une question de flex.
It's a bit of a dance at the end of the day of just, you're almost like dancing with these robots, and you just wherever they dictate you need to go, you kind of go in that direction. That remote thing especially is tricky. I did a piece earlier this year that was like audio reactive, and I had no idea what the volume levels would be in the room. And so I just kind of like sent one file and was like, if this is freaking out, let me know. I'll send one where it's less sensitive. And if that's not enough, I'll send one where it's more sensitive, and we'll just like keep tweaking it by 10% until it's in the right place. And they were open to, you know, we spent 3 hours probably just bouncing files back and forth.
Wow. Yeah, that brings up like an amazing point on like just the value of like good communication. And I love like the dual respect and like appreciation for both like the practitioner and the organizers, and like understanding that it is a dance and having to like work alongside one another. I think, you know, especially, yeah, like post-pandemic, or with a lot of remote work and a lot of things where you're not presently there coming up with, people wanted to reactivate murals or different forms of art through digital art. I'm sure that brings up a lot of like new learning for a lot of people, having to like research things and figure out how things work. And I guess that kind of points to the question on like how digital art changes the vision of a project, and like how you see those things evolving, but also increasing engagement from people across spaces, and how this can kind of just like expand reach for the arts.
Oh, you want to go, Miriam?
I go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking about accessibility with this question. And although during COVID, having work presented online made it more accessible in a lot of ways, it may have increased the audience engagement. A topic of conversation in Atlantic Canada that is true for the rest of the country and the world, but was quite relevant here, is access to the internet in rural communities. And we haven't quite resolved that discussion. It's been ongoing. There's discussion of presenting audio works on the radio being a good way to provide the most accessible digital platform for work. But yeah, that was brought up as a barrier here, and I'm wondering if that conversation extended past Atlantic Canada, or if the conversation around accessibility and digital art was different in other parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something to think about all the time, and I think that the digital and also, you know, kind of wrapped up in the internet presents itself as this more equalizing, accessible space that, especially in the past years where so much was happening online, there was sometimes this assumption that it meant it was available or accessible to a broader audience. But of course, this isn't always true. And yeah, it's definitely a conversation. I love your idea, by the way, of audio on the radio. It'd be so cool actually to talk to like CBC about an art show, sound art show. Wow. But yeah, you know, I think technology can really open up doors for communications and access. But of course, this assumption that it means it's totally accessible is not correct. And this is always dependent on devices, internet access, of the kind of availability of information and timing too. So time is always a big factor. I think digital like can extend the access, and this idea of hybrid is also really interesting, you know, when things can happen both online and offline, in person, but also online, finding ways to reach or offer the opportunity to more people. I think that's really enabling with digital art, but there is this kind of flaw in the perception.
Yeah, you just reminded me actually, in 2020, when, you know, the first lockdown period, one of my collaborators, Nate, and I made this like spreadsheet of everyone who's doing art stuff during lockdown and how they were doing it. and I tried to find it, and like there's a lot of, it's a lot of like JPEGs and videos on Instagram, sort of like flattened experiences of, here was a thing that we hoped people would enjoy in all of its fullness, and we can just hold a phone up to it and then stream it in, you know, like 320 by 240 resolution. There's a lot of that kind of stuff, and then there were a few like quite innovative, there were drive-in art installations or drive-through art installations. There's a lot of like car-based stuff, which was cool because it was accessible, but then it was accessible to people who drove. And it was almost like there wasn't really a one-size-fits-all solution, but everyone was trying their best. And speaking specifically about like augmented reality murals, which is something we haven't yet discussed in like direct ways, I think it's really cool to be able to expand as like a person who paints murals and then sometimes does AR stuff. It's really cool to be able to extend the concept visually, but it's also this thing of relying on someone to point their phone at the wall, and then like you've got this huge wall and this tiny screen, and again you're kind of like, oh no, that's the thing you should be paying attention to, and now I've trapped you in this little rectangle instead. And so there's always a compromise there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As much as I love reactivating and extending that experience of a lot of murals, I think I love it when it brings something new. If it like speaks to the artist, or if something is mentioned, or if there's a audio component where you could hear something that you otherwise couldn't experience from the mural, something like that, I always find more valuable or more interesting. And so I guess that also like begs the question of like how to purposefully integrate digital art, and like from your perspective, how you would see that done properly or done like better, and like which ways that we can like just better engage communities in this art form, and extending an experience or taking existing public art or art forms and then adding this new layer of it.
That's a nice question. I think like what you said about activating kind of new senses of the work is really nice and really important to think about. Yeah, why is tech or digital being used? And you know, of course, there's like digitally born work, which is created digitally and shown digitally, and that's encompassed within its own medium. And then there's also like digital extensions of different kinds of work. So if we're talking about public wall painting and murals or sculptures, I think that there can be a really nice element to extend the vision or the experience of the work, where maybe, yeah, like you say, like information is perhaps being shown, or yeah, written details, sometimes backstory about the work, could be an audio story. I love those
Exactly.
ideas. Yeah.
I think that digital work, specifically in my mind, I'm thinking right now of projection work, because that was the main digital medium that we were working with for third shift, is a great way to temporarily activate a space, especially at nighttime. And it also has limited impact on the environment, like on the buildings that you're projecting onto, which we thought was great. It was relatively simple in terms of the setup and the teardown for people on my end, but the impact was huge. If you were maybe projection mapping, or had another element to it, like a sound component, not just projecting a video, but something more multimedia was always very interesting. So that's kind of how I see, that's my first thought of digital public art, would be activating spaces temporarily through projection.
I really do love light-based work, projection, but all light-based work in general. I think I'm just that kid who's drawn to shiny objects. I find that, again, going back to that like dancing with robots thing, you know, you can't control environmental factors. You don't know what other like light pollution is going to be in the space. So it comes down to, again, just trying to make the most of it. And there's always some element of site specificity, even if you're taking a piece that you're showing the same piece in multiple places, it's going to respond very differently based on location. But I wanted to mention a really cool thing I saw in Athens. I like having like links to stuff, so I was trying to find it and I couldn't. But I found the exhibition in general. I just couldn't find the specific piece, so I'll paste that in the chat. It was at a place called Neon, which is this giant former tobacco factory in Athens. And one of the exhibits was this enclosed hallway had been filled with like birdsong. And if you kind of walked around the room and tried to figure out what was going on. And if you got to the end of the room, there's a QR code you could scan, and it would take you to a site that was translating the birdsong in real time. So you could hear what the birds were saying. Obviously fictional translation, but still, that was really cool because it's kind of a delight to discover that there's more. Kind of like what you were saying before, it builds on top of the experience you're having in the room. And I think I personally gravitate towards things that are grounded in the physical world, and then have maybe some sort of like online component that's extra.
Yeah,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to add one more thing when thinking about AR and extending visions of projects, and especially to think about things that do take up, physical space. I think that, using augmented reality and also virtual reality can very much extend the vision of a project, because you don't have to be tied to physical restrictions. So things like size and weight are no longer of consideration. So, I'm thinking about large scale AR sculptures, which are activated by a mobile device. So it does still come down, or AR glasses for the few who might have access to those. But it still means picking up a device and looking through it, but you can have the experience of a very large scale sculpture that requires the person looking to actually move their body and walk physically around the space in order to get perspectives on the whole digital object. But this object can be created without some of the confines that physical materiality demands. And I think that is an exciting potential as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think especially with, an assumption for public art being sometimes permanent. I think also working with temporary public art, whether it's a mural or sculpture or installation work, I think it definitely expands the vision and kind of brings new ideas to light on how to kind of integrate, like making it more mobile and making it like just like multifaceted and how you can move it along, especially with different spaces that do like a series of rotations of projects, and how that would be easier to transfer and like more transferable to different spaces, and like moving that digital art component with it, I think is really cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Nuff and Miriam. I kind of wanted to loop back again to the question that was about like capacity for organizations, especially from your perspective, Katie, like especially talking to resources and like working with different artists, like how that affects your work and how you work with digital artists and kind of like just kind of like meeting them where they need to be met, and like how that works, like elaborating on that point, I guess.
Yeah, I really like what was brought up earlier about communication. I think if I think of the lineup of artists that we've had I think I've spoken to the artists working in digital media probably twice as much as the other artists to sort out logistics. It has always been a lovely experience, which is nice, but it does present challenges. One year, an artist required a bright sign media player. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the bright sign media player, but we asked every single organization in Atlantic Canada. No one had one that we could borrow. And the artist actually required two. And speaking of my other role as a grant writer, it's not easy to find funding for capital purchases, which is a question I have also for Nuff and Miriam about where to access funding for equipment. That was a challenge. We did end up buying the equipment, if you're curious. But I think that was one of the main challenges we faced was lack of physical resources, but also staffing costs are challenging to find. And everything would have been a lot easier if we'd had maybe not an expert, but someone working in digital media or with a bit more experience as the liaison, so that there was less explaining for the artist to do to me. Someone who may have understood right away what some of the terms were or what was needed to install the work. If anyone has ideas for where to access funding for equipment, please let us know.
I think there is an equipment grant. I'm not sure right now if it's OAC or Canada Arts Council. I think there's an organizational grant for equipment actually. But sorry, I'm not sure which funding body it is.
That's okay.
No, that's great. I love that we're sharing these resources.
Yes, it's important.
Right now. Yes.
Yeah, I had a good answer, but it is frustrating, like what tends to be exempt from a lot of funding. It's also like software licenses. Usually, you can't spend that funding on either. And I'm just I guess fortunate that like my business also tends to require a lot of the same software, and so if I can't get arts funding to pay for it, I might be able to do, like, it might be a business expense. The one thing that I have seen is that through education, through like universities, that funding tends to be a lot more liberal about what you can spend it on. And so if there's any way you can have partnerships with either institutions or with students, there's a bit more leeway in terms of I've been able to get some licenses through Toronto Metropolitan University, as an example.
That's important to know. Sometimes new media arts centers like Trinity Square Video also are able to hook up artists with licenses for various softwares. But it's such a challenge, absolutely. And I mean, when it comes to acquiring equipment, the equipment can very quickly evolve. A new edition comes out and it can become like, no longer working, like we talked about with files that work on, updated devices. And so it can be really challenging to even think about acquiring equipment and then ending up like a year later needing to update the devices that you've just spent money on. This is the grant, by the way. I shared it in the chat, and I think the due date is kind of soon.
Yay, thank you. I'm also thinking about artists working in more traditional media, let's say painting. Their materials are paint, and that is a valid material cost because it's a resource that you're using up. But for a digital artist, their material could just be their software in their computer, but those wouldn't be considered eligible in the same way as other materials. Anyway, challenge.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I hadn't even thought about it through that lens, which is why these conversations are so valuable. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Thank you for sharing those links. That's amazing. Yeah. I also wanted to kind of, again, expand also on like the aspect of digital art, the kind of like, you know, I guess like make the world in a way smaller and like these geographical locations, you know, that are like more rural areas. Like, again, I understand like the challenges that come up with it, and I appreciate you bringing that up. Katie, with like certain, you know, areas not having certain connection problems and things like that. Just like your experience with that, like as curators, as organizers, how do you mitigate those problems? How do you work around them in this art form that is so unique in a sense, I guess? My question was kind of off the cuff. I hope it made sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And I think personally, it's like an ongoing challenge that I don't fully have an answer to. Working in the last couple of years, doing a lot of online exhibitions, working in VR spaces. So I think there's a desire to make the information accessible, and this comes down to a lot of communication. So, you know, relying on multiple formats to communicate what's going on, whether it's social media or newsletters or just conversations with communities that I'm connected to. I mean, to a degree, I think it's so valuable and important, but there's an aspect of, you know, everything maybe can't be available to all at all times. And so I try to just, you know, think about that accessibility and make sure that that's always a focus, but also recognizing that there are times where it just can't be done. But earlier I said I'm really interested in hybrid formats and also conversations like this that happen online. So I think there is a lot that has been opened up by the capability of internet and online communications. Spending some time in, you know, virtual reality, and usually when I am, you know, attending an event or doing something, there's always people from like all different places around the globe that are there in the same moment. And of course, this doesn't mean that all are able to join, but there's also something gained by the capability of being able to have this kind of meeting. So it's like a tension, I think, that, yeah, I don't know if it can be fully resolved, but it's like really important to focus on.
I mentioned radio earlier, and we did incorporate some radio programming into our festival, especially in the 2020 and 2021 years. We did have a few audio documentary style pieces that were submitted to the festival. And they were submitted with the understanding that they would be played on the radio. We didn't even have a plan for how they would have been presented in a gallery space, probably more, you know, a headset kind of situation, but we didn't get that far because we had decided right away that they would be made for radio. So we mentioned that radio in a way is very widely accessible to people without internet connection or without a good internet connection. That being said, the engagement numbers wise was lower than our online programming. And so that begs the question, making things accessible is only truly as valuable as it can be if those who you're hoping to include know where to find the work. So yeah, reaching out to rural areas where people might want to engage with our festival may have made more sense than just putting it on the radio and hoping people would hear it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Oh,
Sorry.
it's
I was
okay.
just thinking about the last time I listened to the radio.
Yeah,
And
That's
think I
it.
just love
Yeah.
it.
Where do you listen to the
Fell
radio?
off-
It has a
just
radio.
fell
Yeah.
off my line.
Yeah. No, that was exactly my point too, is that I guess to like Miriam's point, like as much as we want to grant as much opportunity to people to have access, in some ways there's always limitations, because again, like if you're doing it, you know, via an internet meeting, there are certain demographics who would join. And if it's radio, I also haven't listened to the radio in I don't know how long. So I guess, yeah, it's really interesting how like those things, like even if it was broadcasted or someone had told me beforehand that it was going to be available, I'm not entirely sure that I would be the person to tune in. But again, you don't want to like isolate those communities. So yeah.
I'm like having an emotional breakdown. I used to love CBC radio too. It was my gateway to Canada. And just like, I just stopped. Didn't even think about it until today.
I listen to the radio when I drive like share cars. I started a share car service, side note, but
Yeah, it's drivers and I guess shops. Like, does the grocery store play radio, or is it now playlists?
Yeah, I realized too that I don't listen to the radio because since I've like moved to Toronto, I don't even know like the popular radio stations to listen to at all, because I never listened to it. So I don't know like what the local stations are or anything like that, which is so interesting.
I'm sorry for derailing the conversation. I just really love radio, and I'm a bad listener. I should go back to it.
Definitely go back to it. I'll let you know if anything goes on the radio from our end. You'll be the first to listen.
I think it's so nice to like really push and explore all the different mediums and like channels of communication that are out there. And I guess it's just about communicating. And you know, I think it's so beautiful to put things on the radio, and maybe that there wasn't that many listeners that came on purpose, but you probably had listeners that kind of stumbled across it. And I think that's really like so special. And that takes me back to thinking about murals as well, and this incredible quality of, you know, the passerby or the unexpected engagement, the surprise of experiencing an artwork that you didn't intend to go to. And I think that's also really valuable in this conversation. Yeah.
I have a question for everybody about QR codes, because it seems like QR codes are one of the easier connectors between the physical installation and the digital component of a work. In my experience before COVID, QR codes were present but not fully understood in terms of how to use them. Some people may have found them frustrating because of lack of data on their phone, or maybe they're, you know, I think phones now are smartphones, iPhones, they can scan with the camera feature, but I think you may have needed a QR scanner before. Widely used during COVID. What is the landscape like now in the digital media sphere about QR codes? Are they a useful tool? Are people moving away from QR codes? What's the landscape currently?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know how much landscape I can speak to, but I'm going to go completely off topic and say that I saw the funniest sign back in February. When were people driving around with signs? February. I'm going to say it was February. Someone had written, QR codes are for products, not people, on a sign, and they were taking that to a protest. And I was like, first of all, you're thinking barcodes, different thing. Secondly, they're obviously for people. Like a product can't use a QR code. And third, it's just a link to a web address. Like why are you getting so upset over this? They were protesting the vaccine passport. And I understand where they were going. It was just really badly executed. And whenever anyone talks about QR codes, I think about this person in their car holding this sign. And I hope that someone educated them, because I didn't. To come back to the topic, as I was saying, like, it's really just a quick way to, it's basically the equivalent of getting someone's phone out, typing the link, and then pressing enter and giving the phone back to them. Just a quick way to get someone to a website. And if you can avoid that whole trip to a website in the first place, if you can embed the information on site, that's probably ideal. But if you're going to have to send someone to a website, then a QR code is like the fastest way to do it.
Yeah, just the other day, I was actually putting up stickers that have QR codes on it for an artist who's based in Japan, who is a musician and released a new remix for his album via an augmented reality experience, and printed some stickers. And so from time to time, I'll put them up somewhere, and someone might stumble across it and scan the QR code and then experience this immersive augmented reality remix of the song. And as I put it up on this kind of billboard on Queen Street in Toronto, there was posters all over this board, like layers of posters, and every single one had a QR code on it. So yeah, I guess it's just a means to an end, like you say, Nuff, and it's very practical, it's very useful, it's very direct, and especially now with how often they've been used. I mean, menus, everything. So the action that is required to scan it is, I think, pretty well known. So folks can, if they have a smartphone, they can kind of easily access whatever it is, whatever pathway this QR code is leading to. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of QR codes. There's a lot of them all over the place.
Great. We're coming to an end time-wise, but if anyone had any questions amongst the group for one another, before I open it up for questions from audience, I just wanted to just give this chance for people. We have such a breadth of knowledge, so I just also want to make sure I leave enough room for people to ask questions. But if you guys had any other points you wanted to bring up.
I'm curious, actually, how you navigate, like, someone coming to you with a piece that requires some tech that you don't currently have. Is it just a conversation of like you're asking everyone in the province if they've got a media player? Is that like, how does that usually play out?
I think the biggest thing, other than solid communication back and forth, is honesty on the part of the exhibitor or presenter, and being realistic. It plays out one of two ways if it's done properly. The first way is you try a little bit before committing, and then you have to say, sorry, we actually don't have the capacity to present this work. That is always unfortunate, but it's better than presenting it poorly, which is the third option that I'm not including. And the second is doing a whole lot of resource sharing and collaboration, a little bit of budget management, and a lot of research, I would say. So yeah, the three options are trying and saying, sorry, we can't present this. The second option is trying and succeeding. And the third option is when you're not honest with yourself and you're not realistic and you overcommit for what the organization has capacity for.
Right, sorry, I can't. Miriam, did you want to jump in there? Or?
Oh, I think I would just echo what you say, and I think that's really accurate, and yeah, that it comes down to, sorry, I will echo then, and it comes down to like this communication and resource sharing, I think is really important, and thinking about the community and what's possible. But yeah, I guess it's kind of case by case too, and knowledge sharing is important. You know, if one organization maybe doesn't have the means, or a gallery doesn't have the means, maybe, you know, knowledge sharing to help artists find the places that do have the means to show said digital work, and being open to finding kind of, yeah, different kinds of solutions.
Yeah, and I would say the same goes for non-digital work as well. We're obviously not here to talk about that, but it's not only digital work that these conversations apply to. There have been works that are non-digital that our organization also didn't have the capacity to present because we didn't have a gallery space of our own. So any work that needed a large white wall indoors was just not anything that we could provide. So yeah, it's not just the digital artists that we have to have these kind of back and forth with, it's everybody. But since we're talking about digital work today, that's what we'll emphasize.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot there, Miriam. I just like don't want to cut people off. Yeah, I think I'll open the floor now to any questions. If you would like to add them in the chat, or also just ask, either is great. If you put them in the chat, I can also read them aloud, and hopefully we have some answers for you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. I've had such an amazing time moderating this. I could probably go on and on with this conversation, but yeah. If there aren't any questions from anyone, I will just say thank you all for joining us. And if you panelists have any last remarks before I start the closing remarks, the floor is open.
It was great to meet both of you. Thank you. This was lovely. I learned a lot.
Yeah, likewise, great conversation, and I hope we can keep having conversations like this, and pushing out, you know, the boundaries of what digital art means, and how communities form, and the way that we can connect with each other via new mediums, and what artists are doing. So yeah, thanks for facilitating.
I want to ask another question if no one else will.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just because like I've been kind of interested in digital art and playing in this space since I was very young, but it's always been this sort of like, I would say private, like it's just me and my screen and my computer, and you know, you're on the internet. Like, do people remember DeviantArt? Like it was just me scrolling through DeviantArt, looking at weird stuff that people made. And this interesting transition into public spaces happened where the same sort of work, and you know, the big example would be like Beeple, Christie's acquiring his work for ridiculous money. But there's this like public interest in what I would describe as nerd stuff. And I'm wondering where that came from, like in your opinions, as people who actually work on the organizational side, what has changed?
I think that we all, got older. So like, I also spent a lot of time on DeviantArt, and you just made me think of this, like, like there's like a series of memes that's like, what happened to the kids that grew up playing video games, and it's kind of like, okay, this is what happened. I think, I think that the digital is totally intertwined with all that we do, and like the tools available to artists have grown and developed. So there's more capabilities, there's more possibilities in digital tools. And I think that has really driven the medium, as well as like internet connectivity. So, going from DeviantArt to the way that we can now share and like, be involved in online communities. And back in the day, if DeviantArt had like a chat even, think about how much community would have been happening in that space. But I think that, yeah, like the interest really, I mean, COVID aside, or maybe we can't say COVID aside, but we all then spent a lot more time on our computers being at home. So to me, it just kind of makes sense. Like it's all been evolving and growing, and will keep doing so.
That was very eloquent, and I have nothing to add. Well said.
I wish I could like send a message back through time to DeviantArt and just be like, there's going to be a panel about this stuff in a few decades with like legitimate organizations.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and let's not, but like, NFTs and the whole thing, like it, I mean, I wouldn't say it changed the game, but it definitely evolved all at a very fast speed. And I think it brought like the concept of digital art as something that is sellable or purchasable into a more public perspective, which is important for the medium in general.
Okay, if we do start on NFTs, we won't stop. But have you seen the NFT gallery in New York? Because this blew my mind. Casually walked past it. There's like an actual high-end gallery that's just got a bunch of screens on it, and they just put the JPEGs on the screens, and it's like go in like you would to any other high-end gallery and look at NFTs, and that's where we are. 2022, we did it.
Wow.
We did it.
Love that. Yeah, Web3 NYC, is this the one? I think this must be what I haven't been, but I know some artists who recently opened a show here. But I think
there's a festival happening next month there. It's like a digital art festival happening in November.
Oh, nice.
Amazing. Oh, a question from Huda. Have you incorporated NFTs in your works? Anyone? No.
I've worked with a couple
artists.
Oh, sorry, Nuff. I thought you were finished. What was the last thing you said?
I just said I'm holding out as long as I can.
Yeah, it's volatile, that's for sure. And I think there's a lot to evolve still. It's so new still, even after this really busy year in the NFT world. Yeah, I've worked with a couple artists who are releasing NFTs, but I haven't been very closely involved in the process at this point.
Amazing. Well, yeah, I feel like we could talk forever, but I'll let everyone have an early afternoon or early evening. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Nuff. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you all who joined us through Facebook and here on Zoom. Thank you to our ASL interpreters and LSQ so much for help and support on this. I want to thank my collaborator, Bridget, Thank you for the engagement team for your support on the back end with all of the tech. Yeah, thank you all so much. This has been such a lovely conversation. We also want to thank our funders. The CreateSpace Residency is supported by the City of Toronto as a part of Artworks TO, Toronto's Year of Public Art 2022, the TD Bank Group through the TD Ready Commitment, Canada Council for the Arts, and Ontario Arts Council. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your evening or afternoon. Yeah. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.